I'm not used to a transition from the guitar to here. By the way, if you're wondering who that was my sister. And I grew up in a family that they sang all the time, and they would never let me get on stage with them, so I just had to get my own church to be able to do it. And so they finally let me in. When I was younger, I remember one of my friends got a skateboard one day, and I thought it was the neatest thing ever. It seemed like a really fun idea to hop on a skateboard and look cool and do flips and all whatever you do on a skateboard. So I decided I was going to try it out. Now, I have to preface this with I had never been on a skateboard before. And so I got on a skateboard, I hopped on, and I skateboarded down about 30 feet or so. And I understood the basics. You want to keep your feet generally on the board, and you kind of push off, and you don't want to fall. That's the general idea of skateboarding, right? And so I did about 30 feet, and I decided, you know what? I'm an expert now. It's time for a challenge. And so to test my newfound skills, because check, I had done it, I was going to go down a hill called Dead Man's Curve. It was this hill that we called Dead Man's Curve in our neighborhood. It was this big hill that came all the way down one part of our neighborhood, and right there at the end of it, it just took a sharp right turn. And I thought, I can do this. That hill isn't that big, and I'm pretty much an expert now after my 30 seconds of skateboarding. And so I got the skateboard, and I walked up the hill. I walked up about halfway because I was terrified of the entire thing. And I got about halfway up the hill, and standing up there, I realized this hill is a lot taller than it looks from the bottom. But you see, my buddies had seen me go up, so I couldn't back out now. I had to go forward with it. I had to come all the way down the hill. And so I get ready, I put the skateboard there, and I step on to the skateboard, and I begin my descent down the hill. Now, in my mind, I'm already panicking. I'm thinking I got in way over my head. And I start down the hill, and it starts out okay because you start out slower, but going down a hill, you pick up speed very quickly. I learned about the laws of physics that day. And so I'm coming down the hill, and the skateboard begins to wobble. See, I didn't know that was going to happen. It was going to get harder to control the faster you went. And it began to wobble as I'm going down the hill, and I realized I'm not going to be able to make the turn at the bottom of the hill. I'd be lucky if I could just hang on. So I had to make a decision, and my decision was bail out now. And so I did. I jumped off the skateboard. The problem was I was going way too fast for my feet to catch up with me at this point. So my feet hit the ground, whipped out from under me, and I went sliding down the hill on my arms. I ripped off, actually, I still have a scar to this day right here where I ripped off all the skin on my arms. It was a terrible experience. And needless to say, I have never stepped on a skateboard again. Sometimes in life, we encounter a problem or a difficult circumstance, and sometimes we lose. That day, I encountered a problem. Now, the problem, by my own admission, was that I put myself into a situation. And at the end of the day, why did I fail? See, we grow up in a society, we're brought in a society that says you can be anything you want to be, you can do anything you want to do. You know what I found out that day? That's not true. I could not skateboard down that hill. It's very true. Now, maybe if I had practiced or something, but I can't, with no experience, just hop on a skateboard and skateboard down a hill. There are things that we can't do. And that might seem like a depressing way to start off a message to tell you there are things in life that you cannot do, but the reality is you can't. This week, we're in the second part of a series called Limited, where we're looking at how we as limited people can live limitless lives. And specifically this morning, we're going to look when circumstances around us seem stacked against us, when the world seems to be coming against us, or there's problems in life that look like they're going to destroy us, how can we have success? How can we not be limited by limiting circumstances? And the reality is, it's not just try harder or think positively enough, because I want to tell you, I tried very hard to not fall off that skateboard, and I thought I could do it. The problem was I was wrong, and I wasn't capable of doing it. And this morning, we're going to see, as we open God's Word, to see how people that are incapable of doing something can still have success. And for you and me in our lives, when we encounter problems that we think, I can't do this, I can't beat this, I want you to hear me very clearly. You're not always supposed to be able to beat it. And you're not always supposed to be able to defeat it. But we know a God who can. We are a limited people, and the only distinction that we can have in our limitedness is knowing a limitless God. And when we follow Him, when we pursue Him, we can find out what it is to live a limitless life. If you have a Bible, I do invite you to open up with me. I'll be picking up in Exodus 13, or you're welcome to follow along with me on the screens. Exodus 13, where I'll be picking up in verse 17, where we read about the people of Israel. Exodus 13, starting in verse 17, says this: When Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them on a road through the Philistine country, though it was shorter. Now stop there. Now you might be wondering what's going on. So I want to catch you up to where we're at in the story. We're reading about the Israelites here, and they are leaving Egypt. They have been in bondage under Egypt. They've been in slavery in Egypt. This guy Moses was led there by God to lead the people out of Egypt into the promised land. And so where we pick up, the 10 plagues have just happened, followed the culmination of that Passover where God took out the firstborn of all the families in Egypt. And Pharaoh finally says, okay, the people can go. I'm tired of fighting this. God is clearly on your side. I'm going to let the Israelite people go. And the Israelite people begin going toward the promised land. So that's where we're at. So with that, now I want to jump back into the text. When Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them on the road through the Philistine country, though it was shorter. For God said if they faced war, they might change their minds and return to Egypt. So God led the people around by the desert road toward the Red Sea. The Israelites went up out of Egypt, armed for battle. Moses took the bones of Joseph with him because Joseph had made the sons of Israel swear an oath. He said, God will surely come to your aid, and then you must carry my bones up with you from this place. After leaving Succoth, they encamped at Etham on the edge of the desert. By the day, the Lord went ahead of them in a pillar of cloud to guide them on their way, and by night a pillar of fire to give them light, so that they could travel by day or night. Neither the pillar of cloud by day or the pillar of fire by night left its place in front of the people. Let's stop there. How can we be limitless when our circumstances are limited? Here's the first thing we will see. We must follow God's route. We have to follow God's route. If we want to know how we can be limitless because of God, we have to follow God. Now we pick up here, the people have just left Israel, or just left Egypt. They're heading toward the promised land, and there's an unusual thing happening here. You see, the Israelites are used to a pretty rough life. They have not had it good thus far. They've been in bondage for a long time in Egypt. They have been beaten, been abused, been bruised. They had continually tried to be allowed to leave Egypt and continued to be oppressed under harder and harder slavery. And then it looks like the Israelites finally catch a break. God has come to their aid. God is leading the people out of Israel toward the promised land. He has made the Egyptians let them go. And you would think they just go straight there, right? I want to pull up a map for you. I want you to see visually kind of what's happening here. All right, this is a map coming from Egypt heading toward the promised land. Now, up there on the top left, you see where it says the land of Goshen. That's generally where they're starting at, okay? Now, in the middle, you see the red line going all the way down toward the bottom and up again and down again and up again. That's going to be the route that they follow. Now, where they start in the land of Goshen, notice at the very top, there's this little dotted line. And then right below that, there's another little dotted line. And a little ways below that, there's another little dotted line. Those dotted lines there are trade routes. What they are, they're roads. They're roads that the Israelites could have easily just hopped on and gone straight to where they needed. They were the interstate highway of their day. And so naturally, if they're trying to get from point A in the land of Goshen to the promised land, which is up and to the right, they would naturally hop on one of these roads that's going practically straight there. They had 3 different options they could have hopped on. But instead, they travel straight south. And where we pick up in the story is right there by Migdol, up in the top left. They come straight south, and they get up by the Red Sea. And here's the problem. There's no bridge there. Unless they want to get on a lot of boats and start traveling back and forth, they are walking themselves into a position that they can't get to where they're supposed to go. The question is, why did they take this crazy route? The very simple answer is because God told them to. God told them to. Now, if any of us were planning this trip, we would say, hey, Israel, very quickly you need to get out of Egypt, especially if Pharaoh changes his mind, which we're going to see he does in just a moment. You need to get on the fastest way out of here. But instead, they just start wandering down, seemingly aimlessly, and we have to ask ourselves, why? Why are they going this weird way? It's just because God said to. And the way that God says to go looks so different from what we would call logical. The logic of God is contrary to the logic of this world. And so where we pick up here, we see the people of Israel. We're going to be able to say a lot of things throughout the history of Israel that they didn't listen to God. This is one of those times that they were clearly listening to God. And they were following the way that he said to go. Very simply, how do I know they actually followed him? Well, because the Bible actually gives a description of what's happening every day and every night. It says that there is this cloud going in front of them by day, and by night there's this fire that lights the way for them. And they're just following where God is showing them to go. And so wherever God goes, that's where they go. What we find is that sometimes God's way of leading isn't something that would make sense to us. Why'd God send them on an unusual, crazy route? A route that was eventually going to get them blocked up by the Red Sea? A route that they were going to experience difficulty? Well, I don't want to guess as to why God's doing things, but the good thing is he tells us why. God actually says, here's why I sent them on this crazy-looking route. Because if they went through the normal trade routes, they would encounter war, and they would turn back. They would encounter war and they would turn back. Very simply, they had to trust God because God knew something they didn't know. God was aware of something they weren't aware of. And so what in our minds would be the easy way, the simple way, the logical way, God said, I need you to go another way because there is something standing in your path that you can't handle. Notice God didn't say, okay, let's go the normal route, and when you get there, I'll just let you be strong enough to handle it. God here says if they go on one of these trade routes and they encounter war, they're too weak. They're not strong enough. They'll turn back. They are limited people. And the only reason that they don't fall to how limited they are is because God saw fit to send them another way. Let that soak in for a minute. God knows that you are limited. God knows that I am limited. God knows that we are absolutely capable of failing, of falling to sin, of making bad decisions. And the way that He keeps us from sinning isn't always just making us strong enough where we can do anything and be anything that we want to be, but rather He says, go a different way. He says, follow the way that I'm telling you to go. And the problem for us is sometimes we don't like God's way. Right? Let's be honest. We don't always like what God tells us to do. If I'm on this trip with Moses, I'm going to be the annoying person, right? I'm going to be that backseat driver saying, Moses, you're going the wrong way. Seriously, Moses, you're going the wrong way. I know there's a cloud of fire and a cloud leading us in the daytime, but this is clearly the wrong way. Let's go. It will be much faster. We don't always like God's way. God's way tests us because He knows things that we don't know. He's aware of things that we are not aware of. But for us to be limitless, we have to be willing to follow His route. I remember when I was in student ministry, I'd love to play different games with our students. One of them would be blindfolded relay races. It's hilarious. Take a bunch of teenagers, blindfold them, and tell them to get somewhere quickly. They want a bit of help. You know how you give them help? You give them a partner has to tell them, you need to turn right, you need to turn left, you need to go straight, go forward 10 spaces, go backward 10 spaces, anything like that. And so we would take these students and we would blindfold them and give them a partner, and they'd begin to walk through these obstacle courses. You know which ones did well? The ones that listened. The ones that listened. It was never the kids who just went all out, ignored their partner, and just tried to find their way through it. Why? Because they couldn't see. They would just be running into walls and chairs and any obstacle I could find to put in their way. But their partner could see where they were going to trip up, and if they listened, they didn't have to fall. And those were the people who made it through, and those were the people who won. See, the problem for us in our lives when we start making decisions based on our own intellect, based on our own desires, is this: we think we can see everything. We think we're aware of those barriers and those obstacles that are going to come up, and if we're just smart enough and if we just try hard enough, we'll figure it out. But we can't. We're limited. We are limited, but God can see all of it. And so when God says, here's the way I want you to do this, here's the way I want you to live your life, here's the plan of salvation, and we say, but I don't like that, God. I'd like to do it a different way. God's up there saying, you don't realize that going down that path, there's going to be something there that is going to destroy you. And if you would just listen to me, I have a better way. Now, please understand, even as these Israelites, that they don't encounter any hardship. We're going to talk in just a minute about how they get very scared going God's way. But they weren't defeated because they were following a limitless God. See, when we hear things in Scripture like, I am the way, the truth, and the life, no man comes to the Father but through me. There are people who say, I don't like that Jesus said that. And that seems very exclusive, the idea that Jesus is the only way to have forgiveness of sin. Here's the problem. Us not liking it doesn't change whether or not it's right. Us not liking it doesn't change the reality of what he had to say there. When God tells us, here's how I want you to live. Here's how I want you to make your decisions in life. Here's what I want you to do with your life. Here's career decisions I want you to make. Here's family decisions I want you to make. I say, God, I'd like to do it this way. I think God will eventually say, okay, do it your way. And you know what happens? We end up on our face because we got on a hill that we weren't ready for. I want to stop believing the lie that I can do anything and start understanding that God can do anything. And I can be a part of that if I will just follow him. How can we be limitless when our circumstances are limited? Well, first, we follow God's route. Here's the second thing we're going to see in this story. Slow down and wait on God. Slow down and wait on God. So they've been traveling this crazy route. They're going south. They're encamping right near the Red Sea, and they then encounter a problem. Now remember, they're on God's path. They're exactly where God wants them to be. Here's the problem. Pharaoh changes his mind. Pharaoh looks around, he sees the people leaving, and he thinks, you know what? I just let all these people go. And I don't like that. Because these people were their slaves. They did all their work for them. He thinks, well, if they're gone, then who does all this work? And so Pharaoh sends out the best of his army to go chase down the Israelites. And so they're encamped there by the Red Sea. They're blocked in on one side by the Red Sea. And the Israelites look up, and all of a sudden Pharaoh's army is coming after them. And they know this isn't like a, hey, you forgot your jacket on your way out. No, it's chariots. They're fully clothed in armor. They know there's about to be a war. I'm going to pick up here in chapter 14, verse 10, as Pharaoh is approaching. It says this: as Pharaoh approached, the Israelites looked up, and there were the Egyptians marching after them. They were terrified and cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we say to you in Egypt, leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptians? It would be better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert. Moses answered the people, do not be afraid. Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance of the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. The Lord said to Moses, why are you crying out to me? Tell the Israelites to move on. Raise your staff and stretch your hand over the sea to divide the water so that the Israelites can go through the sea on dry ground. I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians so that they will go in after them. And I will gain glory through Pharaoh and all his army, through his chariots and his horsemen. The Egyptians will know that I am the Lord when I gain glory through Pharaoh, his chariots, and his horsemen. Let's stop there. See, here, the Israelites who have been following God's direction start to stress out because God's plan seems to not be working. And if you've been a Christian long, you probably have experienced times like this. You've tried to do it God's way, the way that He was leading, the way He was guiding, the way He was directing, and you come up and you find out, even doing it God's way, all of a sudden, I'm backed up against a sea on one side, and there's an army ready to destroy me on the other, and we start asking God, God, what are you doing? What are you doing? I did it your way. You said, do this, and I will have a limitless life to just pursue you. And here I am, caught up in the middle of something that I am completely incapable of doing. God once again looks and He says, that's the point. That's the point. That we will see that we are incapable of doing it on our own. So we pursue after God, and even while we're following after God, there are these moments where we just have to stop and be still and listen and let God work. See, the Israelites reacted like a lot of us would have reacted. God, I should have just stayed. I've done all this work to clean up my life, to do these things, to pursue you. And where has it gotten me, God? My life is still frustrating. You brought me out of slavery, but now I'm just in the desert and I'm about to get killed in the desert. Why does it matter which place I die? Could have left me alone. And we, in our lives, we do this. Maybe it's just me. Maybe I do. I go through life, and there are times where I just think, God, I'm doing it your way, and yet we still experience frustration and problems in life, and we're not supposed to experience that, right? We start to panic because we think, I can't handle this anymore. I can't do this. And here's the point at which many people fail. Because we come back and we realize we are limited, and maybe we've accepted that. We're limited, so we're going to follow after God. We hit one of these moments where things get really tough and really hard, and we remember that we're limited, so we think, well, I'll just give up now. And God's point is not when we hit problems that we can't handle that we just give up. He rather says this. It's a crazy instruction. He says, be still. Stop. Stop trying to do anything. Don't just put everything down and just stand in my presence and watch me work. See, God put them in a place where they had to realize how helpless they really were so that they could see how powerful He really was. Sometimes God allows us on His path to get to a point of desperation so we can see how powerful this God really is. We have to be reminded that when we are weak, He is strong. And sometimes we need that point of comparison. Over this past weekend, I've had some family in town. My sister and her kids are here, and I love watching my niece and nephew play with my daughter, mostly because it means I don't have to watch my daughter, and so like they take care of her. But last night we were at dinner, and I was laughing because my niece and nephew, they were holding their hands up to my daughter's hands to see whose hands were bigger, and then they wanted to hold their hands up to my hands to see whose hands were bigger. And they would hold their hands up to Ellie's hand. Say, oh, I have big hands. They would hold up their hands to my hand and say, my hands are little. My hands are little. Your hands are so big. And I started to see with them, I've noticed they start asking questions. Well, who's taller? Or who's shorter, or comparison questions. They want to know, in comparison, who's the more powerful person here? Who has the bigger hands? And when they realized, when they held up their hands to mine and they saw how little their hands are, then it's the symbol of, then he's stronger, he's bigger. But when they held up their hands to my daughter's hand, they think, well, I'm strong, I'm big. And it's simply a comparison. And what we do in life so often is we like to hold our hands up to other people. Let me see how I measure up. Yep, I'm bigger and I'm stronger than this person. I'm not quite as strong as this person, but I'm close enough. I'm spiritually adequate compared to this person. This person is spiritually superior to me. This person is spiritually inferior to me. And we hold up our hands to other people. But here what God does is he makes the Israelites hold their hand up to his. They realize, oh, I'm tiny. It's not even just, God, you're bigger than me, or it's God, you are infinitely powerful. And I am so small in comparison to you. And what happens here is God gets the Israelites to the point that they desperately understand that so that they can go to God and say, okay, God, then I can't do it. I can't do this on my own. Only you are capable of doing something here. This is the entire point of salvation. You want to know what it is to be saved? It's a point where we realize our sin is a problem for us and we can't do anything about it, but God has. And through Jesus, because of his sacrifice, he has redeemed us from our sin if we just put our faith in him. So the Israelites here have to continue to chase after God and then trust him and stop and be still. Now here's the crazy thing. Earlier in the passage, it actually said this. I don't know if you caught it. It's in chapter 13. It says the Israelites the Israelites were armed for battle. Verse 18, the Israelites went up out of Egypt armed for battle. I don't know if you caught that earlier. The Israelites were already ready to fight on their own. Now, when I read that and I think, okay, you're armed for battle, you have an army coming against you. What's your natural reaction going to be? Fight. Yeah, it's either go into the ocean or fight. So they would fight. What's God say for them to do? Does he say, fight? Defend yourself? No. He actually says this. Be still and do nothing. And God allows this cloud to come between the Egyptians and the Israelites. The point wasn't that if they just tried hard enough and they did enough, that they would be strong enough to succeed and overcome, but rather God was going to overcome for them. They were ready for battle, but God was fighting the war. So they didn't take it in their own hands. This might be one of the most central and also the hardest points for us to understand as a believer. That we have to let God fight for us. There are times that God just says, be still. Be still and know that I'm God. And for many of us, we just have a problem with the be still part. We just can't be still. Well, I got to do, I got to act, I got to pursue. Just stop. Stop and rest in my presence for a moment. I'm going to be honest. So one of my biggest difficulties in life is just stopping and resting in God's presence. But God commands it here when they're about to go to war, or it looks like they're about to go to war. Stop and rest in my presence. I think that must be a pretty important command. How can we live limitless lives when our circumstances are limited? First, we follow God's route. Second, we slow down and wait on God. Here's the last thing we see. Experience a miracle. Experience a miracle. So here's how the story wraps up. I'm just going to read the very end of the chapter. Verse 29. But the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground, with a wall of water to the right and to their left. That day the Lord saved Israel from the hands of the Egyptians, And Israel saw the Egyptians lying on the seashore. When the Israelites saw the great power the Lord displayed against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord and put their trust in him and in Moses, his servant. Here's how the story ends. God did exactly what he said he would do. God said, you know what? Hold out your hand over the ocean, the sea, and I'm going to separate it. You're going to walk through on dry land. What happened? Moses held out his hand over the sea, and it separated, and they walked through on dry land. He said, now the Egyptians, they're going to chase after you. They're going to come down into the sea. And when they do, I'm going to show them how powerful I am. I'm going to wipe out this entire army. So what happens? The Egyptians, they come down after him into the sea, and God sends them into confusion, and he allows the waters of the sea to come back and completely wipe out the entire army. And the Israelites had victory that day without ever drawing a sword, because they trusted God to fight their fight. Now, this isn't an excuse for us to do nothing when God says to do something. Remember, God did say, walk, and they walked. And there are other times when God does say, pick up and arm yourself for battle and be ready and go out into battle. But here, God just says, walk. And we read about this, and this was one of the great miracles of Scripture. We think, oh, when God separated the sea and the people walked through on dry ground, that was a miracle. And so they experienced their miracle that day, but we think, stuff like that doesn't happen to me. That's a real miracle. Here's all a miracle really is. It's when God acts inside of this world to do something incredible that we couldn't do on our own. It's a very simple idea of what a miracle is. It's God doing something that we could not do. And that day we look and we see God separated the ocean. That's a pretty big deal. Let's remember, let's put our hand up to God. God is the God who created the entire universe. Every star, every planet, everything that we have yet to see in the universe, God created every bit of it. So when we look and he pushes a little puddle out of the way and we think that's a big deal, God's just like, really? That's tiny. He blows on the ocean and it moves out of the way. And I'm not taking away from the awesome aspect of that God can do anything, but rather we shouldn't be surprised when God does something like this. If you walk by a dog and it barks, nobody says, oh, wow, that dog just barked. I've never seen that before. Or if you see a car driving down the road, you don't think, wow, that car just drove down. I've never seen a car do that before. Yet, when we hear the idea God did a miracle, we think, I've never seen God do a miracle before. In reality, I think we just don't know what to look for a lot of the times. We're waiting for the Red Sea to get out of the way, but maybe we don't need a sea to get out of our way. And maybe God's already doing miracles in our lives, and the only question is, are we willing to experience them for ourselves? See, I often wonder if one of the reasons we don't experience miracles, one, we're not looking for them, and two, we don't ask for them. See, we all, if somebody gets sick, we'll pray for them. We pray for sickness. But when it comes to like God doing something in our lives, a lot of times we try to make decisions. I don't want to bother God with that. Or we do this. We say, God, here's how you should fix this. Don't we? That's how we pray. God, I got a plan. Get in on this. It's good. We need to cross, and we're going to use this trade route. And God's like, no, we're going all kinds of crazy ways around this. And we pray and we think God didn't do a miracle because he took me this crazy way. And God's saying, yeah, that's where the miracles are happening. Get off the trade route. Trust me. If we would just say, okay, God, I'm going to follow you and I'm going to experience some miracles for myself and I'm going to recognize them when they're miracles. We don't have to tell him how to do his job. I remember when I was a kid, there was this one time I was walking around my neighborhood. I was really struggling through just, I wanted God to do something that I could see. I began asking, God, would you just, I'm struggling with my faith right now. Would you do something? Just make something fly across the sky or something. And then I'll be able to see in a very physical way that you are exactly who you say you are. It will renew my faith. And so I'm telling you, this was silly. I was a kid. But I picked up a stick and I was like, wherever this is pointing, there better just be something flying across the sky. So I picked up this stick and it kind of went like that and it shot off to the side. And I looked where it was pointing. And I kid you not, I looked up in the sky and there was a plane flying across the sky. And I was so angry because I was like, seriously? God, I wanted a comet or like some big bang in the sky. Planes are flying all over the time. Like that's not, there's nothing unusual about a plane flying across the sky. And I believe that was a moment where God just said, get over it. Get over it. And he didn't put riding up in the sky, but I believe what he did that day is he gave me exactly what I needed to. What I needed to have my faith renewed in a laughable way. God said, stop asking me to prove myself when I have proved myself over and over and over to you. And just begin to recognize when I'm doing miracles in your life. See, I can almost guarantee that today, if you trying to go to the park, you walk up to the pond, it's probably not going to split in half for you just walk to the other side. Probably not going to happen. But you're probably also not getting pursued by an army. I don't know what miracles you need today. But Israel didn't get to decide what type of miracle God was going to do. They simply were willing to accept the miracle that he offered. And why did God do all this? It says it right there at the end. The Lord displayed against the Egyptians, and the people feared the Lord and put their trust in him. What's the point of all this? That we would fear God and put our trust in him. I know today's been a little bit different, unusual. I hopped up on guitar, out of my comfort zone. We are limited people, and we are incapable of doing lots of things. We serve a limitless God. Just a moment, I'm going to ask Steve to come back up, and we're going to sing Amazing Grace one more time. Remembering that our chains are gone. Sorry, Steve, I just kind of threw you on the spot there. We're going to sing one last time, and I just ask you, well, are you following God's route for your life? If you are following his route, what happens when you encounter a problem? Are we okay with the fact that we're going to still encounter problems and maybe we just need to stop and slow down and be still in his presence? Then are we willing to experience a miracle and recognize it for the miracle that it is? If you need somebody to talk to, I'm going to be up here for the next few minutes. Feel free to pull me aside. I'll be in the back after the service. Whatever God's telling you to do, you be obedient to him. As we worship one last time, let's sing about his amazing grace. Steve, will you lead us?